Minister of the Exchequer. Alex Mayer.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government is committed to supporting people to save and invest, and we want to build a better investment culture. Currently, 85% of people with savings income do not pay tax on it, and as we announced at the budget, from next month we will expand the Help to Save scheme to all universal credit claimants in work.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The nation's favourite way to save is through premium bonds. Does the Minister think that they are good for the country, a valuable way of encouraging saving, and for everyone who has them, quite exciting every month?
Mr Speaker, I think they do provide excitement, not least in my parents' household. I think they're very popular with them. They're already well promoted and very popular, and we've seen annual investments in premium bonds increase by over 50% since March 2019, and the funds raised through them go towards supporting vital public services.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Government's commitment to extend the Help to Save scheme. This scheme's been running for 7 years. Martin Lewis describes it as a very clever scheme and one that will work for many people. Can I urge the Minister to look at what needs to be done to raise awareness of it? Because the actual uptake is very low, given that the Government are going to give £1,200 and have been giving £1,200 over 4 years. It is critical that the right investment in promoting this happens, because it's such a brilliant scheme.
Well, I couldn't agree with one of my predecessors more. I think he's absolutely correct. It's a great scheme, and now that we are expanding it, we'll take that opportunity to promote it better.
Dame Begg-Hillier, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we all know how important it is to encourage savings, because so many people are a paycheck away from poverty. But there's been a lot of discussion about lazy capital in cash-only ISAs, for example, and other savings accounts. And I know there's a drive by government to see greater investment. Would the Minister like to expand on the government's thoughts on this, and particularly if she can make any comments about the security of the cash ISA?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Cash savings provide a vital source of income, of savings for a rainy day. We recognise that. But equally, we want to build a better investment culture in our society, so that it's not just the 8% of people who can afford financial advice who can have the opportunity of better rewards by investing in British companies and others in our economy.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On that point, it's been widely reported that the Chancellor is planning to slash the amount that savers can save in ISAs from £20,000 to £4,000 per year. Will the Chancellor rule out this punitive measure that will see savings drop and push even more people into income tax?
We are committed to promoting savings and investment, as I said in an earlier answer, and one of the measures that we are looking at is the FCA's review of the advice guidance boundary, because I said in a previous answer, I don't want it just to be the 8% of people who can afford financial advice to reap the rewards of investing in our economy. All taxes under review.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The City of London has been a leader of innovation in the world of finance and savings for a few hundred years now, and it's been successful because it has always seized opportunities and innovation when presented. And in that spirit, we are pleased that the Chancellor, in her Mansion House speak, embraced the concept of securities tokenisation. But we now find that the catalyst of this innovation in the UK, a pilot for the digital gilt instrument known as Digit, has found itself in a 2-year black hole. Innovation is not something that can hang around for 2 years. So can the Minister give assurances that she will do everything she can to deliver Digit as soon as possible?
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It sounds like a criticism of his the previous government. I can reassure the honourable gentleman that we are committed to innovation and indeed committed to Digit.
Louise Jones.
Number 2, Mr Speaker.
Chancellor.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I should like to answer this question together with question 18. Economic growth is the #1 mission of this government. Putting more money in people's pockets and ensuring growth is felt in all regions of the UK is a core part of our mission. The government has a clear focus on investing in the infrastructure needed to support cities and regions to grow and thrive. In January, the government announced a partnership between East Midlands Airport and Prologis to build a new advanced manufacturing and logistics park, unlocking up to £1 billion of private investment and 2,000 jobs at the airport site.
Louise Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The town of Staveley in my constituency of North East Derbyshire hosts one of the 3 sites for the East Midlands Investment Zone, which is a fantastic opportunity for us. However, the Chesterfield-Staveley regeneration route is vital to making the most of the site and is something long campaigned for by my colleague, the Honourable Friend MP for Chesterfield. And it is a huge priority for my constituents. Will the Treasury work with us and our excellent East Midlands Mayor Claire Ward to bring this hugely beneficial project to fruition?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question and the work that she does alongside with the honourable member, my honourable friend for Chesterfield, to campaign for things that will boost local growth in the area of North East Derbyshire and also in Chesterfield. Regarding the Chesterfield-Staveley regeneration route, the scheme is being considered by the Department for Transport, and I will suggest to the Minister for Roads that he meets with the relevant members as well as the Mayor for the East Midlands, Claire Ward.
Jane Craft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government's decision to increase defence spending is not only an ironclad commitment to national security in the face of generational challenges, but also an investment in British industry, able to unlock new jobs and opportunities across the country. Industry in the east of England has a significant defence sector, receiving £1.5 billion of government investment last year. So can the Chancellor clarify how the additional defence funding has the potential to benefit my constituents in Thurrock as well as the wider region?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she is absolutely right that defence has a very important role to play in the growth mission as well as keeping our country safe and secure. On Friday, the Defence Secretary and myself hosted a roundtable at RAF Waddington in Lincoln to announce a new Defence Innovation Hub to harness this potential. And Defence has a strong presence in so many of our constituencies. Indeed, in the east of England, the MOD spending accounted for £1.5 billion, according to the most recent data. And down the road from my honourable friend's constituency in Thurrock is, of course, the historic MOD Shoebury Ness range. MOD and Kinetic operate this site and others as part of a long-term partnership worth over £5 billion. And in the years to come, there will be more investment in defence from both the public and the private sector.
Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Government's ever-elusive pursuit of economic growth, it has rebranded the UK Infrastructure Bank as the National Wealth Fund. Even the OBR has cast doubt on the effectiveness of this as a driver for economic growth. Can the Chancellor tell the House how much this rebrand has cost?
Chancellor.
The National Wealth Fund is doing an important work ensuring that we can leverage in private sector investment. The most recent investments include in mining in Cornwall, in energy charging points in our road infrastructure, and just at the end of last week I announced that the National Wealth Fund will now play a more important role in funding and supporting investments in our defence sector, which is going to be even more important in the years ahead.
Lee Anderson.
I recently visited a business in Kirkby in Ashfield in the East Midlands. Funnily enough, I didn't see the honourable member for Strangford at the time, but this business told me that the increase in national insurance contributions is going to cost them £240,000 a year, which will stop them recruiting people and giving their employees a pay rise next year. So does the Chancellor agree with me? It's time to reverse this ridiculous decision and help drive growth in the East Midlands.
Hear, hear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the budget in October, I had to fill the £22 billion plaque hole left by the previous government. But there are huge opportunities to grow the economy in the East Midlands. We've recently agreed the £9 billion Unity deal with Rolls-Royce to support the Royal Navy submarine fleet. This is a major boost for economic growth in the East Midlands, creating and maintaining 5,000 long-term jobs. Good for our country's security, good for the people of the East Midlands.
Monica Harding.
Question 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to answer this question together with question number 20. The Government has taken difficult decisions to repair the public finances, to fund public services and to restore economic stability. The OBR expects the employer national insurance contribution changes will reduce the level of potential output by 0.1% at the forecast horizon. The OBR forecasts growth to pick up next year and living standards to grow faster during this Parliament than the previous one. In the long term, the OBR expects the autumn budget policies, if sustained, to permanently increase the size of the economy.
Monica Harding.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Alison runs Stepping Stones Nursery, which has been operating in my constituency of East Walton for 30 years, offering wraparound care for busy families. The increase to employers' national insurance alone will cost them £16,000 per year, and they're still struggling with an increase in utility costs. And this is in the context of nurseries in the area struggling and closing. And Headmasters, a hairdresser in Walton, is struggling with £15,000 of extra cost, primarily due to this tax rise. So can the Minister explain to businesses in Eastern Walton how this government's national insurance policy will deliver growth or higher living standards, because it seems to be doing neither?
Mr. Speaker, the government's decision to increase employer national insurance contributions was one of the toughest decisions we took at the budget, but it was necessary to restore stability to the public finances, because it is only on the basis of having stable public finances and fiscal responsibility that we can boost investment and growth that will make people across Britain better off.
Mira Wilson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. As the poor growth figures show, the Chancellor's jobs tax is really hurting businesses, not least our hospitality sector. Pubs like the Eel Pie and the King's Head, as well as family-run restaurant Shambles in my constituency, are really struggling with soaring costs, putting off hiring people. So if the Chancellor won't reverse her jobs tax, will she at the very least consider extending the current 75% business rates relief for hospitality until the new system she's announced is in place?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member speaks about business rates relief. We've got to remember, of course, that the business rates relief for retail, hospitality and leisure was due to end entirely in April 2025 under the plans we inherited from the party opposite when we were in government. Despite the tough fiscal context, we decided to extend that relief, that 40%, for another year before the permanently lower rates for retail, hospitality and leisure come in from April 2026.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that planning reform is essential for higher growth and lower taxes? And I'd like to ask, is he, like me, concerned that the anti-growth opposition we see before us in this House will vote against the forthcoming planning and infrastructure bill, possibly the most significant piece of pro-growth legislation this Parliament will see in decades?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he's absolutely right about the centrality of the planning reform to getting the economy growing. Indeed, one of the first actions the Chancellor announced upon taking office was to scrap the ban on onshore wind turbines in the planning system, which has been holding back our clean energy transition. I hope that some of the members of the opposition might take the opportunity during today's questions to confirm they will support our reforms to the planning system, because they are indeed vital to growth in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that it is in the interests of business to see waiting lists in the NHS reduced, to see our roads repaired and to see the public finances fixed? And does he agree that if the parties opposite don't agree with Labour's plans, they should set out how they would pay for these improvements?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that the stability in the public finances are crucial to make sure that we boost investment and growth across the country. And he's also right to point out that having public services which are back on their feet after years of decline under the party opposite being in government is also essential to not only making people in this country healthier, more able to get around and better off, but to getting our economy growing, because it is on that basis that businesses will invest.
Shadow Minister James White.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Even before Labour's jobs tax comes into force, we can see the damage it's doing, and 750,000 jobs in hospitality will be subject to employer national insurance for the first time, costing £1 billion. So when major hospitality and retail businesses are warning that the lower paid and part-time workers will suffer most, will the Chancellor think again, and can the Minister at least commit there will be no further increases during this Parliament?
Mr. Speaker, the businesses the honourable gentleman referred to, like businesses in all sectors of the economy, benefit from the stability which this government has brought to the economy. And if he wants to talk about unemployment, if he wants to talk about the rate of jobs, we recognise that the changes to employer national insurance contributions were a tough decision that will have consequences. But the unemployment rate will fall to 4.1% next year and remain low until 2029. And when taken together, the budget measures mean that the employment level in this country will increase from 33.1 million in 2024 to 34.3 million in 2029.
The Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Health and wealth are two sides of the same coin, and we will not get economic growth without a healthy population. But as a result of the National Insurance contribution changes, the Care Provider Alliance reports that 73% of social care providers will have to refuse new care packages from local authorities or the NHS, and 57% will have to hand back existing contracts. Mr. Speaker, what assurances can the government provide to the huge number of people who are very scared that they will have to go without care and see their lives deteriorate?
Good question. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady makes an important point, but it is also important to point out that tough decisions on taxation have to be made to fund those very services which she is keen to support. However, to her point specifically, to support social care authorities to deliver key services in light of the pressures, we announced at the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement a further £200 million for adult and children's social care. This will be allocated by the Social Care Grant, which will bring the total increase in this grant in 25-26 to £880 million, meaning that up to £3.7 billion of additional funding will be provided to social care authorities in 25-26.
Mr. Speaker, ministers will be aware of analysis from the Nuffield Trust that shows that additional grant has been dwarfed by the additional costs that the government is introducing. But on the Great British High Street, we know that our high streets are beautiful features of our cities, market towns and villages. But hospitality, retail, beauty and other service sectors are saying that the combination of national insurance and other changes will be a real hammer blow. If high streets shops start to close, that is bad for economic growth and it's also bad for confidence. So what mechanisms will ministers put in place to monitor the impact of the national insurance contribution changes on the vibrancy and resilience of our high streets?
Well, Mr. Speaker, all measures in the budget were, of course, analysed by the Treasury and the OBR ahead of their announcement, and we keep in constant contact with industry representatives to see how policies are taking place in practice. But I would draw her attention to my earlier remarks to her honourable friend in relation to our business rates reform, which is a vital ask from the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. And after years of chopping and changing from the party opposite, changing reliefs 1 year to the next, offering no stability whatever to people in that sector, we are introducing permanently lower rates for retail, hospitality and leisure from April 26 and avoiding the complete end of relief that the party opposite left in the in-tray when we arrived in office.
Kevin Bonavia.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I should like to answer this question together with question number 5. The growth mission is the central mission of this government and transport an important enabler of that growth. The spending review delivered a £1.1 billion cash increase to the transport budget in 25-26 compared to 24-25, representing a 1.5% real terms growth with record spending. Further announcements will be made in the spending review.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, Stevenage Borough Council are working to secure jobs and opportunity with town centre regeneration underway and over 590 council homes delivered. But outdated infrastructure is holding back growth. Businesses have been clear with me that upgrading Stevenage Station Gateway will unlock growth with a prospect of 15,000 jobs to be delivered and £1.5 billion benefit to the economy each year. So will my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss how we can make the most of this opportunity to unlock economic growth through more infrastructure investment?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that investing in infrastructure will enable growth in towns, villages and cities across the whole of our United Kingdom. We will set out further detail alongside the spending review in our 10-year infrastructure strategy in June. And no doubt Stevenage being sited between London and the Oxford-Cambridge corridor will be benefiting enormously from announcements already made. But decisions on specific schemes will be taken by DfT following the spending review.
Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Midlands Rail Hub is a project which would represent major investment in rail infrastructure across the West Midlands and would crucially mean more frequent trains on the Cross-City line, which serves Lichfield. Before the pandemic, this was the busiest commuter line in the country outside of London. What assurances can the ministers give to me and my constituents that more trains on this line are going to be coming and coming soon?
I thank my honourable friend, who's a strong champion for his constituency and for raising this project with us here in the House today. Rail projects such as the case he's made in his constituency will be an important part of our consideration in the months ahead as part of the spending review, and I'll arrange for him to meet with the appropriate Transport Minister as we make those considerations.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The great university cities of York and Hull are unusual in that they do not have a direct rail line between them. Labour MPs, Liberal Democrat councillors, Conservatives, everyone in the whole region is united in believing that reopening the Beverley to York line so that the two great minsters of Hull and York can be reconnected would bring economic growth and a brighter future for the area. Would the Minister agree to meet with me and colleagues to discuss this project and how it could help unlock the growth which we all seek across the House?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that the right honourable gentleman failed to persuade his party-winning government to open that line over the last 14 years, but I can give him reassurances that this government takes rail infrastructure seriously, and I'll happily consider any detail he wishes to write to me about.
Gregory Campbell.
Mr Speaker, the economic growth through infrastructure development could be helped in Scotland and Northern Ireland with more money going to the Cairn-Ryan port and the roads infrastructure to there. Allied with that, any help that the Department and the Minister and the Chancellor could do on resolving the EU-related trading issues would considerably help Northern Ireland business as well as Scottish business.
The honourable member will know that the government has entered negotiations with our counterparts in the European Commission to improve trade between the UK and the European Union. I had a great meeting last week in Cardiff with finance ministers from the Northern Ireland Executive as well as from Scotland and Wales to discuss these issues and noted that we have given a record-breaking increase in funding to the devolved government so that they can get on with projects such like this, working in partnership with us where we have responsibility still.
Stringer.
Sorry, Mr Speaker. Number 6.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I should like to answer this together with question number 16. At Autumn Budget 2024, we set out the first major steps in our approach to regional growth through devolution, investment and reform, and the January Growth Speech Regional Investment Package built on this. We have made clear the government's focus on attracting inward investment across the country and to investing in infrastructure needed to support cities and regions to grow. We have made it clear that the importance of investing in major city regions across the UK will play an important part in this endeavour. For example, if we improve the productivity gap in Manchester, Birmingham and Leeds, we estimate we could deliver an extra £33 billion in economic output.
Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was nearly as shocked as when you just called me then, listening to the Chancellor of the Exchequer on Radio 4 talking about economic growth, when she said there hadn't been a new runway built in this country since 1945. Manchester Airport would be very surprised to hear that because the new runway there has been operating for nearly 25 years. I was shocked by that, but not really surprised because I think many of the officials in the Treasury who advise her show a startling ignorance of the English regions. And that leads to certain prejudice in the formula they use for calculating whether a scheme should go ahead. Can the Treasury Minister and the rest of the Treasury team provide coaches to send Treasury officials round the English regions to talk to people who know about growth there? And secondly, will he look at the formulas that are biased against the regions that decide where economic growth happens?
I thank my honourable friend for his questions. I will do my best to answer them. I can confirm that Treasury officials routinely engage with local and regional officials across the country, including frequently in Manchester with Mayor Burnham and his team. I would point him gently to some of the announcements made by the Chancellor, including support for the Old Trafford development in Manchester, and of course congratulate the operators at Manchester Airport for running a successful business, which we will continue to support in the normal way.
Michelle Strachan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. At the autumn budget, the government announced a range of support measures for small businesses, including vital support for retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Will you confirm the measures being taken to support the independent and important craft brewing and distillery sector in Cumbria?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. As the House has already heard today from my colleague, we have made permanent decisions to give businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors security around knowing that their discounts will apply to business rates relief for the long term, not just on a one-year rolling temporary basis, as has been the case for years under the last government. And I understand from my honourable friend that the likes of Shed One Gin, Wolftown and Kin Vodka in Cumbria will benefit enormously from this government's policy, and I look forward to visiting with her those establishments in due course.
Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Golden Valley development in Cheltenham will bring significant growth to the West. It would also back our national security by supporting GCHQ. Now the Chancellor has approved 0.1% of extra defence spending to go for intelligence and cyber. Will the Chancellor work with colleagues in the MOD, DCIT and the Cabinet Office to agree more funding for this nationally significant development? And if the defence point isn't good enough, it's also going to unlock a lot of nice new houses as well.
Yeah.
I thank the honourable member for his question. I was on a visit to Newport last week with Airbus, looking at some of the advanced technologies we have in this space, and they told me about the important connections between Newport and his region with GCHQ and the industrial impact that has on the supply chain in the UK. The increased spending announced by the Prime Minister in defence will have a significant positive impact for businesses such as those and for his region, and we'll look forward to setting out further details of that spending in the spending review.
Madam Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Marches region, of which North Shropshire is a significant part, is held back by the road between Llanymynech and Oswestry in my constituency, which is very dangerous, the A483. It holds back local growth because there are frequent crashes and hold-ups on it, and obviously it's a danger to life for people who live in the area. Can the Minister work with his colleagues in the Department for Transport to ensure that we get vital improvements on that road if we can't have a bypass?
I thank the honourable member for her question. I can commit to working with DFT colleagues on projects such as this and others around the country as we make decisions in the upcoming spending review. I will just make an observation that it's not just about the decisions around spending. It's been a problem in the past where decisions have been made and then U-turned and made and then U-turned. It's difficult for the supply chain, difficult for investors and local communities. And in our multi-year capital budgets and our 10-year infrastructure strategy coming in the months ahead, we will give stability to the UK economy so that we can get on and deliver projects such as the one she mentioned.
Shadow Minister Gareth Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor has lauded the new National Wealth Fund as being a key part of their regional growth ambitions. The trouble is, it isn't actually new. It's just the UK Infrastructure Bank with a new colour scheme and £7 billion it didn't need. The Prime Minister announced at a recent Labour Party political conference that he will allocate £200 million for Grangemouth from the National Wealth Fund. But it's supposed to be operationally independent. So can he confirm that that is still the case? Was the full independent investment process followed? And can he confirm that the unexpected resignation of the National Wealth Fund CEO just days before that announcement is not connected?
I find it odd, Mr. Speaker, that members on the benches opposite don't welcome an additional £7 billion of investment into our economy. It's rather a testament to their poor performance on investment over many, many years in a government. To answer the specific questions, I can confirm that each of the business cases in relation to Grangemouth will have to go through the normal process for sign-off, and that John Flint leaving the National Wealth Fund is not in any way connected to decisions taken by this government, and we look forward to making an appointment for his successor in due course.
Mary Glendon.
Mr. Speaker.
Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an important question when, shockingly, household incomes in the North East hardly grew over the long 14 years of the last Conservative government. We need to raise public and private investment, which is why we're working with the North East Combined Authority on their local growth plan. And the Office for Investment is working particularly closely with the North East, alongside Liverpool, on developing local growth opportunities.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the town's access to the world's biggest offshore wind farm, a cluster of advanced manufacturing firms and an expanding energy skills academy, more of Newcastle upon Tyne East and Wallsend potential is yet to be tapped into. What discussions is the Minister having with the Energy Secretary to ensure that the investment is there and green supply chains are anchored in places like Tyneside?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spent far too much of my life talking to the now Energy Secretary, but the honourable member is completely right to highlight the potential of green energy supply chains in her constituency and across the North East. This is a government committed to securing the economic gains alongside energy security from the energy transition, in stark contrast to the previous government that thought the net zero transition was something to create dividing lines out of, not jobs.
Cat Smith.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Moving on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At budget, the government announced major steps towards delivering a once-in-a-generation increase in social housing. This included a £500 million boost to the Affordable Homes programme, increasing annual spend to £3.1 billion, which is the biggest annual budget for affordable housing in over a decade. Earlier this month, the government also announced an additional £350 million to fund affordable homes. Mr. Speaker, this is the difference a Labour government can make to people waiting desperately on the waiting list for secure housing across the country. Further investment decisions will be set out at phase 2 of the spending review.
Catherine Smith.
I thank the Minister for his reply, and will he join me in paying tribute to the Lancaster Guardian for their recent investigative report into the reality for many families in the Lancaster district living in temporary accommodation. This is paired with a frustration I hear from local house builders and developers about the delays in the planning process in the district in order to build those homes. Is there anything further the Minister thinks that can happen in Lancaster that would help ensure that families in the district actually had secure housing?
I thank my honourable friend. She knows that we're doing everything possible in this place to streamline and improve the planning legislation and the planning processes, with clear signals to everybody across the country that we need to build and build rapidly, not least for our housing targets. Local councils play an important role in this process, as we know, to make decisions for local developments. And I understand that in Lancaster City Council, my honourable friend has had some struggles with the Green Party in becoming blockers as opposed to builders. I would say to them and to people across the country, they need to get behind the build agenda, because that is what the British people voted for.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. To what extent is the Chancellor concerned about multiple potential breaches by HMRC of its charter since it issued Spotlight 63, which impacts rental housing supply and is causing real concerns amongst my constituents who have met me, both landlords and tenants? And would the Minister meet with me to urgently discuss these issues around Spotlight 63?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I have no idea what the answer is, but if the honourable gentleman writes to me, I'll make sure he gets an answer.
Nigel Calliscott.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I just press the Minister a little bit more about... Oh, number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is committed to spending taxpayers' money efficiently. At autumn budget, we launched the Office for Value for Money to realise benefits from every pound of public spending. Through phase 1 of the spending review, departments will set a 2% productivity, efficiency and savings target to ensure that every pound of taxpayer money is well spent. The next phase of the spending review has gone further. I have asked each department to conduct a line-by-line review of existing day-to-day budgets to identify where spending is no longer aligned with this government's priority or is poor value for money.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for his answer? As a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I see on a weekly basis the waste that was under the previous government, from billions spent on badly procured COVID contracts to a Rwanda scheme that delivered nothing. Can I press the Minister for the steps he will be taking to make sure that we deal with not only value for money for the taxpayer, but also the legacy of waste under the previous government?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and members on the benches opposite are chuntering, but it's their legacy. Not once in 17 years was a zero-based review done. Not once did ministers, former ministers opposite require their departments to go line by line through their budgets. Not once did they think that it was a responsible thing to do to be able to go through and check how every pound of taxpayers' money was spent. Instead, it was an argument each year. How much more money am I going to get? How much more borrowing is there going to be to pay for these bills? How many more promises am I going to make, which I know I will not deliver? The British people were sick to death of that approach to politics, and this government is taking a fundamentally different approach.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund provides excellent value for money in mid-Sussex at Beacon House, which is a specialist mental health and trauma clinic. But unfortunately, their financial future is looking uncertain at the moment. Does the Minister agree with me that investing in mental health is always a good idea in terms of getting people back to work and well again and able to contribute to society? And will the Minister work with the Department for Education to secure future funding for this vital service?
I thank the honourable member for her question. I agree with her entirely that mental health services are in desperate need of investment and support across the country. The evidence is very clear that there are too many people, for example, who are out of work, who would like to be in work, but are waiting at home unwell, unable to receive the support and services that they need and that they deserve. The Health Secretary is working hard on this at the moment. We're going into the spending review negotiations over the coming weeks and months, and we'll set out further detail in due course. I look forward to be able to provide more information specifically as we go through that process.
The Minister, Richard Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Improving public sector productivity was the #1 ask of Institute of Director businesses trying to weather Storm Rachel. But under Labour, public sector productivity has fallen further behind pre-pandemic levels. The number of civil servants working from home under Labour has gone up. And shockingly, under Labour, as the Daily Telegraph found, thousands of civil servants are being signed off to work from abroad. So whether it's civil servants working from their bedrooms or from Benidorm or for other blockers of public sector productivity, what has the Chief Secretary actually done in his last 8 months in office, or is he too comfortable with what the Prime Minister calls the tepid bath of managed decline?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I think my #1 ask is he has another go at making better jokes in future. But to answer the substance of his question, I agree with the honourable member that the state is not productive enough on a whole range of issues. He talked about civil service headcount. He talked about government offices and locations. He talked about working conditions. He could also talk, for example, about digital transformation. Quite frankly, there is an enormous amount of work which will become evident through our spending review. It's something that we are taking very seriously, not just in the Treasury, but from the Prime Minister downwards. And I look forward to him reflecting on what we suggest is the answer to 14 years of failure from his party when he was in government.
Sir Desmond Swin.
Number 10, sir.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the autumn, I took the decisions to put our public finances back on a firm footing. The most recent GDP data showed the economy grew by 0.4% in the last month of last year, and our fiscal rules, as I've said on many occasions, are non-negotiable. The party opposite sent mortgage rates and business borrowing costs spiralling. We've returned stability to the public finances to give families and businesses the stability that they need.
Sir Desmond.
The servicing cost is now twice what we're spending on defence, which she's right to be increasing. So what is her level of ambition for finding savings, say, in the welfare budget?
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman that we need to get a grip of the welfare budget that got out of control under the previous Conservative government. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures from the party opposite that crashed the economy. And let me remind the House what the right honourable gentleman said about the disastrous mini-budget. He said, "I share entirely the free market ideology that underpins the Chancellor's statement. The Chancellor was right to be radical." He added, "I rejoice at the two fingers the Chancellor has raised to socialist dogma and envy." Well, I think that the financial markets and British public have united in their view on the previous government.
Lynn Stewart.
Question 11, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I would like to answer this question together with question number 11 and 15. Economic growth is the #1 mission of this government, and Scotland will play an important role. At autumn budget, we announced that the Scottish Government will be provided with £47.7 billion in its settlement in 2025-26, the largest in real terms in the history of devolution. We also confirmed £130 million of targeted funding, including for city and growth deals.
Lynn Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Scotland, we have seen almost 2 decades of wasteful spending, while public services get worse. Does the Minister agree with me that good public services are essential to economic growth? And does he agree that taxpayers in Scotland are not getting good value for their money under the SNP government?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. On my recent visit to Scotland, I heard just that. The people of Scotland deserve the same approach that the people of England is getting from this government, a government with stability, with economic growth at its mission, and with getting a grip on public finances after years of failure. Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, we've given the Scottish Government the money. They now need to get on with the job, and if they can't, they need to move out of the way.
Tracy Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me on the importance of Scotch whisky industry. Support for the industry starts at home by attracting investment, including at the Port of Leith distillery in my Edinburgh North and Leith constituency, which is producing single malt Scotch whisky, attracting tourists and showcasing the best of Scottish hospitality. My right honourable friend will be aware of the concerns from the industry about the watering down of the definition of single malt. which will have an impact on investment and growth. Will she therefore work with Cabinet colleagues to ensure that no changes made to the definition of single malt that would undermine the Scottish success story and investment in the Scottish whisky industry?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotch whisky is a proud British brand and export, and this government will always support the industry. I've checked with DEFRA ministers and can confirm to my honourable friend that we will not be watering down the definition of single malt whisky.
Mr. Oh, no.
Mr. Speaker, you will have seen the film Skyfall, in which James Bond and M travel up the A9. But the A9 is a killer road, and we've had a litany of broken promises from the SNP government that is hardly conducive to economic growth in Scotland.
I thank the honourable member for his tour of the scenic A9 and the importance of this road to Scotland. And I would, I'm sure, support what would have been his question, which is that the Scottish National Party in government in Scotland ought to take infrastructure seriously, as we are here from the UK government. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We can listen to the braying from Labour MPs in Scotland, or we can look at the facts. And the facts are that the Scottish economy grew 12% more than the UK economy did in 2024. That's because of the SNP Scottish Government forensic focus on making Scotland the most attractive place in the UK for FDI year after year, for having a progressive taxation system, for rewarding our public sector workers properly, and for investing in our communities. What difference does he think that business agricultural property relief and business property relief will have on the Scottish economy? Positive or negative?
I thank the honourable member for his question. Of course, when we make changes to taxes, even when that is difficult, it results in additional funding for him and his colleagues to spend. And I'm sure he's grateful that we've given a record-breaking increase into investment into the Scottish Government. And he may not be grateful for nothing and may be agitating in his place, but I suggest he goes back to the people of Scotland and explains his record in government.
Judy Lopez.
Question number 12, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to keeping taxes on working people as low as possible, which is why we are not increasing the basic, higher or additional rates of income tax, employee national insurance contributions or VAT. The government has published tax information impact notes for tax policy changes made at budget, which give a clear explanation of the policy objective together with details of the tax impact on individuals. The OBR publishes an economic and fiscal outlook alongside budget, which sets out their assessment of the effect of government decisions taken on tax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, borrowing costs are soaring, the economy is weakening, and we need to spend much more on defence. Now, in these circumstances, can people be absolutely confident that to meet her fiscal rules, the Chancellor will not be raising income tax in the course of this Parliament?
Mr. Speaker, the OBR spring forecast will take place on March the 26th and will be accompanied by a statement to Parliament from the Chancellor. Ahead of the statement responding to the forecast, the government will not give a running commentary on economic developments, but I reassure her that the Chancellor's commitment, and indeed the whole government's commitment to our fiscal rules, is non-negotiable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, it shouldn't be working people that pay more tax, because wealth inequality is growing in the UK, and improving living standards is what ultimately this government will be judged on. So, does the Chancellor see the merit in introducing an annual wealth tax of 2% on people with over £10 million worth of assets, which would go an awful long way in raising £26 billion per annum to equalise society?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope my honourable friend will welcome the £200 million investment in Grangemouth facility, which we've spoken about during this debate already today. And I hope he will also support the decisions the government has taken to restore fiscal responsibility to public finances within the tough fiscal rules with the Chancellor set out at budget.
John Cooper.
Question number 13, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Economic stability and growth are vital to help businesses across the UK to grow. The Lloyds Business Barometer, published last week, showed business confidence up 12 points, building on recent surveys by EY and PwC that show that business and investor confidence is rising. This government is partnering with business to unlock investment and to drive growth.
John Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, with her unimpeachable record in the sector, the Chancellor will know that economics is known as the dismal science. And as a member of the Business and Trade Committee, I've spoken directly with businesses one-to-one, and rather than second-hand statistics, the mood is indeed dismal. After her dud budget, can she think again, go back on this desperate jobs tax? The Chancellor is in danger of becoming tough on growth and tough on the causes of growth.
Well, honourable members on the benches opposite welcome the additional money for the NHS, but they never welcome the means to pay for it, which is why we are in the mess that we are in with the £22 billion black hole that we inherited from the previous government. But he says that these are backward-looking surveys. The EY survey of UK CEOs found 82% felt optimistic. The PwC's latest Global CEO survey ranked the UK as the second most attractive global destination for international investment. And the Lloyds survey last week showed a boost in business confidence. Those are the facts. People are choosing Britain as a place to invest and to locate their business. On this side of the House, we welcome that.
We now come to topicals. Josh Newbury.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Is it? Normally.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the world is changing, which is why we must bring about a new era of security and renewal to keep our country safe. Last week, I convened European finance ministers at the G20 to discuss our shared challenges. I set out that national security will always be the first responsibility of this government, as well as national security being the bedrock for economic prosperity. I was also proud to welcome President Zelensky to Downing Street alongside the Prime Minister at the weekend, where we signed a loan agreement that will deliver £2.26 billion in funding to Ukraine above our other commitments to bolster their military capacity, repaid by the profits from frozen Russian sovereign assets. We will use the additional investment into defence to create more good jobs, paying decent wages in all parts of the UK. And that is why we are giving the National Wealth Fund a new strategic steer to invest in technologies that better support our security and defence. Britain is a strong country with strong defences, and I know that we can weather this changing world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a father of a 5-year-old, I know firsthand how important indoor play facilities are. Providers in Cannock Chase, like the Beach Hut in Norton Keynes and the Kids Rule Play Cafe in Cannock, have written to me asking for consideration for a sector-specific VAT reduction and the opportunity to shape the reform of business rates. Would a Treasury Minister be willing to meet with me, local providers and the Association of Indoor Play to discuss the sector's priorities?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. In terms of VAT, the government has no plans to consider zero rating for indoor play facilities, but all tax breaks must be value for money, and evidence suggests that these savings are only partially passed on. I would, however, welcome my honourable friend engaging with us as we look to inform our Transforming Business Rates paper ahead of the budget later this year.
Shall I Chancellor of the Exchequer Mel Stride? How many jobs will the Right Honourable Lady destroy as a result of her jobs tax?
No Shakespeare, Mel.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for that question. I know that he would have looked at the OBR forecast from the budget last year. They forecast that employment will rise in this Parliament, unemployment will fall and real household disposable income will increase. That's a far cry from the last Parliament, which was the worst Parliament on record for living standards.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady didn't reference the fact that the OBR also said that there would be 50,000 fewer jobs as a result of the next increase, and indeed Bloomberg put that figure at 130,000 jobs. It does not need to be this way, Mr. Speaker. On the 26th of March, the Right Honourable Lady should come to this House with a spring statement. She should come with a clear plan around welfare savings, which we had when we were in government. And would she now confirm that she is prepared to do that with our support and put an end to this pernicious tax increase?
What the Right Honourable Gentleman and his party had was 14 years to reform the welfare system. They failed to do so. This government will. We are turning the British economy round after the disaster left to us by the previous government. 3 cuts in interest rates since the general election. Real wages rising at their fastest rate for 3 years. Fuel duty frozen, the pay slips of working people protected, and millions getting a pay rise through an increase in the national living wage. That is the change that this government is delivering. That is the change that they're blocking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During his recent visit to Burton, His Majesty the King sampled one of Tower Brewery's excellent beers, putting our rich brewing heritage in the spotlight. Even though His Majesty and I like a tipple, low and no alcohol sales are up 610% since 2013, with a clear opportunity to support this growing sector while promoting public health. Can the Chancellor give consideration to raising the alcohol-free threshold to 0.5 ABV, in line with international markets, to improve consumer choice and growth?
Answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He is a fantastic campaigner for the breweries in his constituency, and we want the drink sector to go from strength to strength. We are reviewing the responses to the consultation on the threshold that he mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oxfordshire has no nighttime cover for palliative care, meaning patients must dial 111 and wait hours for urgent pain relief to arrive. Will the Minister commit to increasing funding to the Department for Health and Social Care so ICBs, including the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West ICB, can deliver palliative care round the clock?
This government, as the honourable member will know, has already given £26 billion of additional funding to the National Health Service and additional funding to MHCLG for social care. We know we've got more to do. The government's working hard on that, and we'll set out further details in due course.
Whereas, Mr. Speaker, under this Labour government, Cornish tin mining is back. Following the recent Wealth Fund investment in South Crofty Tin Mine at the centre of my Campbell, Redruth and Hale constituency, does the Chancellor agree with me that in doubling the National Wealth Fund investment, this is a perfect example of how public funding should be used to unlock private investment in a strategically vital industry?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and unlike the party opposite, we believe that investing alongside private industry is good for jobs and good for economic growth. I visited the National Wealth Fund's offices last month, and I heard first-hand from them about their equity investment in Cornish metals. This will help to finance the reopening of Cornwall's South Crofty tin mine, creating more than 300 local jobs. And
Order! Look, enough is enough. I've got to get these other members in on both sides. I'm sorry that the front bench doesn't want to get the members in. I am determined to. So it is called topicals. That means it's topical. I want quick answers and certainly short answers to the question. Let's come to the Father House, Sir Edmund Lee.
I hope I won't damage the Chancellor if I commend the fiscally conservative way she's increasing defence spending. Given that if every European country matches our 2.5% commitment, we can release over £150 billion worth of defence spending. Does she agree that we can crack this, because war and peace is always won ultimately by the size of the economy?
I very much agree with the honourable gentleman. That's why I met with fellow European finance ministers in Cape Town at the G20 last week. All of Europe needs to step up. The British government is doing so. We need to see that from other countries too.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Acknowledging that ODA will go down to 0.3% of GNI in 2027, can ministers confirm whether ODA will remain at 0.5% for the calendar year of 2026, which will help ensure that UK aid keeps the maximum number of people alive for the longest possible time?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Impacts on ODA budgets are currently under review by the government. Our commitment is to prioritise legal obligations and minimise disruption, and we'll confirm details in due course. But I'll happily meet with the honourable member and colleagues to discuss this further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Expanding UK airport capacity has a very shaky case for economic benefits because business efficiency is not increasing its use of air travel, and the UK sends 3 times as many tourists out by plane as we welcome in. Could the Chancellor urgently publish her evidence for any net benefits to the economy from airport expansion so it can be carefully examined?
I think we have to decide, Mr. Speaker, whether we're for growth or against growth. This government is for growth, and we will set out further details about this particular project when the developers come forward with their plans for the government to consider.
Michelle Scroggan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous government's mismanagement has left our flood defences unfit for purpose, and this is having a huge impact on my constituents. Will the Chancellor set out what the government is doing to increase community resilience against flooding and coastal erosion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ensure we protect the country from the devastating impacts of flooding, we've committed £2.65 billion over 24-25 to 25-26 to improve flood defences, and we've established a flood resilience task force to feed into our decisions for future spending, which will report in due course.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, Bridgewater's 77 pubs
including the Crossways Inn in West Huntsville, are at the heart of our local communities. Yet the sector overpays $500 million in business rates relative to turnover. So will the Chancellor commit to the British Beer and Pub Association's call for a 20p cut in the small business multiplier, 15p off the standard multiplier, in order to secure the future of British pubs?
Mr. Speaker, we have, of course, frozen the small business multiplier this year and will be introducing permanently lower multipliers for retail, hospitality and leisure premises from April 26, which will benefit pubs. In the meanwhile, they also benefit from our decision to increase the duty relief for draft products.
Chris Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is this government doing to ensure innovation UK tech companies like KO Park in my constituency of Harlow, so it can drive economic growth as part of world-class AI computer ecosystems?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Harlow is home to one of the world's, the UK's largest supercomputers, and we're taking forward the AI Action Plan, and we've also got the Tech Adoption Review, which will look at how we can unlock the potential of our AI in our high-growth sectors.
Sir Oliver Dalton.
Attracting high net worth individuals to spend more time in the United Kingdom drives jobs, growth and, crucially, tax revenues. But unfortunately, the opposite is happening in the UK right now. So will the Chancellor use the spring statement to look at the statutory residence test and, in particular, the ties rules to see whether we can incentivise people to spend more time in the UK, not the other way round?
Mr. Speaker, as part of the reforms announced at the autumn budget, we are modernising the system for people from overseas spending time in the UK with a new residence-based test. We are always looking at ways to encourage people from overseas to spend time in the UK, to invest in the UK and help grow our economy.
Rachel Blake.
Speaker, I congratulate this government on the greatest level of financial sanctions that were announced last week. Does the Chancellor agree with me that keeping dirty money out of the City of London and from homes and communities across our country is vital for our national security as well as our economic stability?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it's absolutely right that we did increase and step up the sanctions last week. Also that the loan agreement that we made with Ukraine last week, the loan will be repaid by the profits on the frozen sovereign Russian assets. Russia should pay for the damage that they have done.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents is one of hundreds of people who suffered from the collapse of collateral. While the FCA has apologised to investors for failing to act faster to stop its fraudulent activities, I'm concerned that without internal changes, the FCA will make similar mistakes again. Shouldn't there be an investigation into the FCA's handling of this case?
Hear, hear. I thank the honourable lady for that question. I'm very happy to meet with her and look at the case that she mentioned because I need to get more detail.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Transport Committee has looked at the economic growth case for Heathrow expansion, and we heard conflicting evidence on the project's growth impact on regions away from London and the South East, and also on other carbon-using sectors. So will the Chancellor ask Heathrow Airport to release the full text of the Frontier Economics report on which she made her decision to expand Heathrow?
We believe, Mr. Speaker, that Heathrow as an important hub airport will have benefits for regions across the country, which Chambers of Commerce have said to us. Of course, I understand the Transport Select Committee is looking at this issue and will consider their report when they publish it in due course.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. St Ralph's Hospice in my constituency faces a £140,000 increase in staff costs due to the government's national insurance hike. This means the hospice will have to further cut staff services that take the pressure off the NHS. Will the Chancellor think again and provide an exemption for healthcare providers from the national insurance cost rise?
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor set out a budget and I've set out during the finance bill and related legislation exactly how we will implement the changes announced at budget. In terms of employer national insurance contributions, there are defined ways in which public sector organisations are reimbursed. They don't apply to hospices as they are largely charities or not part of the public sector directly. However, I would point him to the £100 million of extra investment which we've announced going into improving hospices.
Dr. Alison-Gunn.
Will the Minister agree with me that investment in the 5500 Midlands Growth Corridor will provide an excellent opportunity to deliver this Labour government's mission for growth and opportunity for all?
I joined my honourable friend in celebrating investment into her region. Our growth mission is one where each part of the country will benefit, and we look forward to doing further work with her.
Jim Allister.
Again protesting in Westminster today. Why is the Chancellor of the Exchequer running away from meeting the farming unions from across this nation? Why do those who feed our nation not deserve some of the Chancellor's time?
Mr. Speaker, just 2 weeks ago, I spent a fair amount of time meeting with representatives from the NFU and other representative organisations from different nations within the UK. I listened to their concerns. I listened to what they had to say. We have to be honest that we disagree. They do not agree with the government's policy, and I need to be direct about that, because we had to take a number of difficult decisions at the budget, but I do not apologise for the importance of balancing the public finances and sticking to our fiscal rules.
Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month sees a rise and an extension to the minimum wage. In Ports of North, there are 9,600 minimum wage workers, higher than the national average, leaving many in work poverty and many with desperate need of a boost of living standards. What steps is the government taking to help improve living standards for these low-paid workers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Member is absolutely right that a higher minimum wage is an important way that we make low-earning workers' lives better, as is the extension we announced to sick pay yesterday, which I hope will be welcomed on all sides of this House.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The art of taxation is extracting the largest amount of money with the lowest amount of squeaking from the goose, and yet the Chancellor will have heard the honking of the tractors on Whitehall today to raise an amount of money which will only pay for less than 1 day of NHS spending. So will she commit today to reversing the family farm tax?
Mr. Speaker, as we've debated several times in this chamber and indeed in Westminster Hall, the changes we've made to agricultural property relief and business property relief retain a generous relief for people who are accessing that benefit within the taxation system. It means that people will get £1 million without any inheritance tax being due. That is in addition to the existing nil rate ban spousal transfers. Over that, it's up to an effective rate of 20%, and any money which is due can be paid over 10 years interest-free.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's recent £100 million investment into hospices, including St Michael's Hospice in Basingstoke, will help modernise facilities, enhance digital services and provide more comfortable spaces for patients and their families. Given their vital role that hospices play within all of our communities, will the Treasury continue to work with the Department of Health to ensure the sector's long-term financial stability?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question about hospices, and as he rightly points out, £100 million is being made available for hospices, £25 million in 24-25 and £75 million from April 2025. This capital funding is intended to help charitable hospices to improve and modernise their facilities and physical estate in my honourable friend's constituency and elsewhere across the country.
Tim Parham.
Speaker, Britain is only 55% food secure. In these deeply uncertain times internationally, isn't it time to change policy when it comes to agriculture? Isn't this the day to get rid of the family farm tax and to undo the 76% cut in basic payments and invest in the people who keep us food secure?
Mr. Speaker, as I've made clear to other honourable members, the changes to agricultural property relief are a fair way to raise money which is necessary to balance the public finances. Britain has excellent food security, and that is a priority for this government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's right that the government has put more money into defence. In answer, though, to a previous question this morning, the Chief Secretary said that there is an impact assessment of the overseas development budget. Does this mean this is still in scope in the spending review and there could be changes in that budget in June?
Just to clarify, Mr. Speaker, I didn't say an impact assessment. I said the impact of the changes are being considered by the government, but we will set out the detail on that in due course.
Right, final question, Rishi Sunak.
Can I commend the government on its international leadership at this challenging time? Now, events overnight make it even clearer that Europe must find considerably more resources for Ukraine. Now, the Chancellor has rightly continued our policy of using the interest on frozen Russian state assets to benefit Ukraine. But I believe that now is the moment to go further and to actually seize those assets. Russia's invasion of Ukraine violates the principle of sovereign equality, providing a basis in international law for this, and by acting in concert with our allies, we can ensure that there are no risks to financial stability. So can I urge the Chancellor to push for coordinated action to seize those frozen Russian state assets, give that money to the Ukrainians so that they can defend their country and rebuild it too?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the right honourable gentleman for his words about this government stepping up the funding for defence. Last week we expanded sanctions on Russia, including looking at financial services. This week we've both signed off a UKEF package to provide more military support above and beyond our defence spending, as well as that loan repaid by the profits on those assets. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, we would look at going further, but as the right honourable gentleman knows, it is incredibly complicated to do that in line with international law, but we keep all options on the table because the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. Russia should pay for the damage that Russia has caused.
Right, that completes questions. Let the front bench change over. We now come to the urgent question. Ellie Jones.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, the Israeli government took the decision to block the entry of humanitarian...
Yeah, just ask the question, and then we'll come back.
I'm so sorry. To ask the Minister if she will make a statement on the situation in Gaza.
Minister.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We urge all parties to fully implement the ceasefire to help deliver a permanent end to hostilities. We're very concerned at reports that Israel is preventing humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Israel must not block aid into Gaza. Humanitarian aid should never be contingent on a ceasefire or used as a political tool. We urge the government of Israel to lift restrictions immediately and unconditionally. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire, and a halt on goods and supplies entering Gaza risks breaching Israel's obligations under international humanitarian law. The UK is doing all we can to support this. Alongside our existing support, on 28th of January, the then Minister for Development announced a further £17 million in funding to ensure healthcare, food and shelter reaches tens of thousands of civilians and to support vital infrastructure across the occupied Palestinian territories and neighbouring countries. We must all work together with the United Nations and all partners to continue to facilitate aid and ensure it is sustained. Fully reinstating commercial deliveries will be key, as will allowing more types of goods in, so that civilians who lost their homes can be protected and civilian infrastructure repaired. We welcome the announcement of an agreement to end the fighting in Gaza, and we welcome the release of 38 hostages in Gaza so far, including British national Emily Damari and Eli Sharabi, who both have close links to the UK, Emily, of course, having met the Prime Minister and discussed the dreadful treatment at the hands of Hamas. The hostages and their families have endured unimaginable suffering from the cruelty of Hamas, and the situation in Gaza has continued to worsen. The current ceasefire is the only way for the region to move forward. As we've made clear, we want to see a negotiated two-state solution with a sovereign Palestinian state, including the West Bank and Gaza, alongside a safe and secure Israel. We've also made clear that we would oppose any effort to move Palestinians in Gaza to neighbouring Arab states against their will. Forced displacements of Palestinians or any reduction in the territory of the Gaza Strip are simply not an option. We need Palestinian civilians to be able to return to their homes and lives and to rebuild. International law guarantees them this right. A two-state solution is the only way to secure long-term peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis. Mr. Speaker, as the Foreign Secretary said, you can hold in your heart the pain of the Israeli people and the plight of those hostages and their families, and at the same time you can hold in your heart the awful damage, pain and suffering that this has wrought in Gaza, with well over 45,000 Palestinian people having lost their lives. We must continue to focus on the future, on turning the current ceasefire deal into a political process which leads to the two-state solution, including the West Bank and Gaza.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, the Israeli government took the decision to block the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. The Minister talked about that aid, but it can no longer be delivered. It is once again using starvation as a weapon of war. And today we hear that it has also announced a so-called hell plan that would see electricity and remaining water supplies cut off. These decisions coincide with the end of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement, with negotiations on phase 2 barely begun, jeopardising the release of the remaining live hostages, plans for a withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and a longer-term peace agreement. The UN have said international humanitarian law is clear. We must be allowed access to deliver vital, life-saving aid. Oxfam describes the move, made as Ramadan began, as a reckless act of collective punishment, explicitly prohibited under international humanitarian law. And the International Court of Justice has previously issued explicit instructions to Israel to facilitate aid deliveries to Gaza. Does the Minister agree that the Israeli government is again in clear violation of the ceasefire agreement and of international humanitarian law? Can she confirm whether she or her colleagues have spoken to their Israeli counterparts to condemn its hell plan and to make clear that there must be no resumption of the war and that it is unacceptable for the people of Gaza to be denied critical food, water, medical or any other supplies? Can she tell us what action the UK will be taking against the Israeli government if it continues to illegally use humanitarian aid and access to water and power as a bargaining chip? I know she wants the ceasefire to hold. Can the Minister share her assessment of the impact of these latest developments on the prospects for a lasting, just and fair peace? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the urgent question. A halt on goods and supplies entering Gaza, such as that announced by the Government of Israel, does risk breaching obligations under international humanitarian law. And to answer her question directly, the UK government has been in touch with interlocutors to make that point. In fact, my colleague, the member for Lincoln, is in the region currently, pushing for the peace deal, and hence myself as the Indo-Pacific Minister having to cross this brief today in the House. Humanitarian aid should never be contingent on a ceasefire or used as a political tool. On the 28th of January, the then Minister for Development announced £17 million in funding to ensure healthcare, food and shelter could reach tens of thousands of civilians and to support vital infrastructure across the occupied Palestinian territories. The UK has announced £129 million funding for the OPTs so far this financial year, including £41 million for UNRWA. She has asked about the long-term ceasefire prospects, and the UK plays its part in pushing both sides towards a hopeful future for the region, working not just with Arab states, but also with partners such as the US to try and push for a solution which is in line with international humanitarian law.
Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I've just come back from the Middle East, where we went with the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and whilst the world watches with increasing alarm the disintegration of the peace process in Gaza, we were warned in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in the West Bank, and in Israel that the far-right government in Israel may have no long-term plan when it comes to Gaza, but there is a long-term plan when it comes to the West Bank, and that is annexation. The international community is well aware of this. They see the evictions, they see the demolitions, they see the increasing numbers of Israeli settlements and the 40,000 people who have recently been displaced. In these days of hard power, what is Plan B? What is the international community going to do to stop the annexation of the West Bank? Because it won't be enough to simply condemn it once it's happened.
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee and for her ongoing interest in this important matter of foreign policy, and for the work that she and her committee have done to do personal interviews and personal visits to the region. And this is all part of the supportive role which the UK must play and must take an international role in pushing for peace. On the specific question of the West Bank, the UK government has taken a very tough position on attacks by some of the militant factions or groups who are attacking Palestinians in the occupied territories in the West Bank. And we are continuing to look at measures which are available to get our message across, not just in words, but in actions. And with her permission, I will write to her as the Chair of the Select Committee to give an update on our current position in terms of our assessment of that situation.
Senator Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Speaker, as recent days have shown, the ceasefire continues to be incredibly fragile, and of course we all want this agreement to hold. And none of us should be in any doubt that this hinges upon the release of each and every single hostage held by Iranian-backed terrorists, Hamas, who caused the conflict by their sickening acts on the 7th of October. Those hostages, as the Minister has pointed out, and their families have now suffered unimaginably for over 500 days, and this cannot go on. They've been held in barbaric conditions, and the world has been shocked by the distressing scenes surrounding those who have been released, and the Minister rightly refers to Emily Damari and others. And in Emily's case, she has shared the really awful nature of the ordeal that she experienced in Hamas captivity, and we wish her all well in her recent medical appointments that she's now receiving in the treatment. Mr. Speaker, last week we also tragically saw the distressing return of bodies of those killed under Hamas captivity. And our hearts break for their loved ones, and we mourn them and also the people of Israel. I have a series of questions for the Minister, Mr. Speaker. First of all, what role is the UK playing in helping to get an agreement on phase 2 of this ceasefire over the line? What discussions has the Foreign Secretary had with America, Israel and other regional players in recent days? What engagement has the government had in relation to the plans for the future of Gaza that have been discussed in Cairo, and how to prevent Hamas continuing to control the Gaza Strip? Secondly, what is the government's practical response on aid access? How is the government working to unblock this situation? And what is happening to the British aid that is already in the region or en route? Finally, what recent conversations has the Foreign Affairs Ministers, the Foreign Office Ministers, had with the International Committee of the Red Cross, both on their efforts on hostage release and also on humanitarian assistance more broadly?
Minister.
I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her emphasising of the families on both sides of this terrible conflict, but particularly the British families, of course, who the Prime Minister has met, particularly Emily Damari, the dignity and grace of the families, of all who want a home, of all who want security in the region, and of all who have been affected by this most horrendous of wars. And she evoked in her speech, in her remarks, the terrible images of hostages being released with the most macabre of pantomimes behind them. And this level of cruelty is utterly unacceptable. And the UK has made that very clear to interlocutors, both at ministerial level and at Foreign Secretary level. And of course, she talks about the role of phase 2. And there have been stops and starts in this peace process, as often there is in these very difficult situations. And what is our role? Our role is to continue to speak very closely with the US and Steve Witkoff in order to try and push for practical day-to-day solutions. She asks about British aid and what negotiations we are undertaking. We are in daily contact with the region, pushing for discussions, conversations, dialogue to push for that aid to get back in, and specifically the Red Cross, which is obviously one of our partner organisations. We will undertake, following this urgent question, to contact them with a message from this House that we want that aid to re-enter and to save lives.
Abdissam Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The powerful scenes of Palestinians celebrating the start of Ramadan, even as their homes and lives have been reduced to rubble by Israeli forces, sends a defiant message
to the world that despite the displacement and destruction, Palestinians remain rooted in their land. Will the Minister confirm that the decision of blocking all aid into Gaza, collectively punishing the entire population, is a war crime and a breach of international law, contravening provisions of the Geneva Convention and the Rome Statute?
Minister.
She's quite right to point out the devastating impact of no aid getting through. And she's right to say that a halt on goods and supplies entering Gaza, such as that recently announced by the Government of Israel, does risk breaching its obligations under international humanitarian law. It's not for ministers at the dispatch box to make legal decisions or judgments, but I want to assure her that the former Minister for Development, the member for Oxford East, did pledge the £17 million to ensure healthcare, food and shelter reaching tens of thousands of civilians and to support vital infrastructure. And she must reassure her constituents that the Foreign Office is doing all it can to get infrastructure across the OPTs and into Gaza in order to relieve the suffering.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Colin Miller.
Speaker, the Israeli government is wrong to prevent humanitarian aid entering Gaza. It threatens the lives of Gazans dependent on aid after the destruction of the last 15 months and is a clear breach of international humanitarian law. So what practical steps is the government taking to ensure that the Israeli government backs down and lets the aid in? I understand the depth of distress in Israel over the despicable way in which Hamas terrorists have played psychological games with the hostages and their families. Yet withholding essential supplies of food, medicine and shelter only worsens the devastation faced by the Palestinian people. In the West Bank, we also see illegal settlers violently attacking Palestinians and apparently receiving the support of members of the Israeli cabinet. So does the Minister agree with me that the UK must do all we can to undermine the extremists in this conflict so that a second phase of the ceasefire can be negotiated, all hostages released and Gazans receive the aid they desperately need?
Minister.
Could I thank the Lib Dem spokesperson for his words, and he's quite right to emphasise the psychological impact of this terrible conflict and the traumatised state that there is in the region. And as the Foreign Secretary has said, we welcome the release of the 38 hostages in Gaza, including, of course, Emily Damari, who we've already mentioned. And we think so much of the Lifshitz family, who, of course, had strong ties to the UK, held hostage by terrorists in Gaza, and died. We thank Qatar, Egypt and the US for bringing their support to ensure that individuals and families' horrific ordeal can come to an end. But this is not the end, unfortunately, and that's why it's so important that we have this moment to push. He asks what we're doing practically. We're in daily contact with the region, including our mission there, and we're also obviously having these interventions which push in terms of the international debate for a just solution for both sides of this terrible conflict.
Alice Bellinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I was in the West Bank alongside other members of the Foreign Affairs Committee on our wider trip to the Middle East. Whilst the world's attention is rightly on the devastating humanitarian situation in Gaza, we met Palestinians in the Jordan Valley whose schools were being attacked, whose mosques were being burned, and whose livestock was being stolen by extremist Israeli settlers. This is happening with the apparent connivance of the Israeli security forces, and it appears to be part of a wider plan for annexation. Could the Minister tell us what steps we are taking to protect further erosion of Palestinian land in the West Bank that will make the two-state solution even further away?
Minister.
I thank the member for his question and for his expertise in the area of aid and foreign affairs. And he's quite right to emphasise that the settlers and some of their actions, of course, there are many, many settler communities who just get on with it and want to see a peaceful solution. He's quite right to say that there is violence in the settlements, which are, of course, unlawful under international humanitarian law and do harm the prospect for a two-state solution. I thank him for putting on record, particularly during the holy month of Ramadan, the impact on the faith community and mosques which have been attacked. And this is certainly a point that we will ensure gets through in our next discussion with our interlocutors, both on the Israel side, but also on the Palestinian side.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, no one is surprised that as soon as the world's attention shifted from Gaza, that Israel reimposed their siege, preventing entry of all humanitarian aid. The Minister knows the impact that this will have on the beleaguered civilian population who are already suffering disease, starvation and an absence of health care. After 17 months of giving Israel carte blanche, none of us, least of all Netanyahu, expects there to be any meaningful consequence for their actions. But could she tell me, does she consider what's happening in Gaza now to be a collective punishment? And if she doesn't, what would she call it?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think sometimes the words that we use are really important, and there has been an enormous amount of suffering. And we know that for so many in Israel, they feel we don't understand their need for security. And so many in Gaza feel we don't understand the depth of their suffering. So we must redouble our efforts to communicate what we want to see, which is that two-state solution and that peaceful future for both of these communities, which must live side by side.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The leaders of the Arab world have made welcome proposals about the future of Gaza and its people. What update can the Minister give on the UK's support for those proposals? And will she join with me in particularly welcoming those proposals that they recognise that the terrorist death cult Hamas can have no future in the future governance of Gaza?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's quite right to say that as a proscribed terror organisation, Hamas has certainly displayed some very frightening characteristics of what we would expect a terrorist organisation to do, including the macabre pantomime which we saw over the last couple of weeks with the release of hostages, which is truly shocking. And I thank him for his question, and obviously the exact detail on the next stage of the negotiation is to be defined by the two parties, but we play a real role both with the ally, which is Israel, but also with working with Egypt and Qatar, and also with the wider region, which is why our Minister right now is in the region making the point that we want to be involved, we want to be pushing for a peaceful solution and to see that day when neither terrorism is extant and where the two communities can live side by side in peace.
Kit Maltos.
Mr. Speaker, I was going to ask a question about what we were going to do if the Israelis refused to let in aid or turn on the water and power, but I think we all know basically the answer is nothing. So instead, let me ask this. The Minister quite rightly mentioned the macabre display around the return of the hostages and the condition of those hostages being returned. And she's right. She said she's taken this up with interlocutors, I think she said. But why hasn't she mentioned the return of the Palestinian non-combatants? Why hasn't she mentioned their condition when they're returning often emaciated and with signs of torture? Why hasn't she mentioned the number of senior medics who've been detained without charge and then died in mysterious circumstances in Israeli detention? Apparently there being some kind of investigation which never comes to a conclusion. And is she surprised that people have become cynical about British conduct in this conflict, when it seems that we're only concerned about the welfare of one side?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I think we've had a very balanced approach across this House to the suffering of all the communities based in the region. And I think he is right to mention the terrible suffering of those who have experienced either arbitrary detention or who have experienced allegations of torture by various enforcement agencies. And he's also right to include this in what needs to be the next step of the negotiation around the one side of the hostages, but also those who are being released from prison. But could I also remind him that there are concerns that there might be people who shouldn't have been released, who are being released. And so all of that has to be taken in the round and balanced. And I do encourage balance and understanding about the suffering of both sides of the community and the desire for security, in the words that we use in the House.
Damien Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issue of collaboration, infiltration between Hamas and some UNRWA officials is well documented. Now, clearly, people in Gaza need aid. So can the Minister update us on how we are monitoring the work being done to restore neutrality and confidence in UNRWA?
Minister.
The UK government has been a supporter of the work of UNRWA throughout this conflict and before it, and has been supporting UNRWA financially, as have all international organisations and countries. And of course, there have been problems with certain challenges to individuals who have been employed by UNRWA, but we have consistently joined with allies in expressing our concerns about the role of UNRWA being curtailed. And we urged at the UN Security Council on the 6th of November, the 11th of December, the 3rd of January, the 28th of January, the 25th of February, and in a joint statement with partners on the 27th of October, that we were urging that the important work of UNRWA can continue.
Shocker Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The blockade of aid is just in the last line of a long-term activities that Israelis have committed against the Palestinian people. But what I would like to ask the Minister is this, that now that we have cut overseas aid to a mere 0.3% of GDP, which is the lowest in real terms in 20 years, does she still agree with the Labour Party manifesto that international aid makes the world a safer and more prosperous place? And now does she agree that with this move, the UK's historic role in the Middle East is dead and over?
Minister.
He's quite right to talk about the ongoing need for aid in the region, and the Prime Minister was very careful in his speech, both at the end of last week, and I think he's mentioned it as well since then on the press, that humanitarian aid must continue, and Gaza was specifically mentioned because it is one of our top priorities, and he's aware that the decision is only a week old to divert some of our aid spending into the defence of Europe. But he must also be aware that we will come forward with the detail of that. But could I reassure him and his constituents that Gaza was specifically mentioned in this House by the Prime Minister because it remains one of our top priorities within the Foreign Office?
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that Israel has been emboldened by Trumpian tactics in imposing a total siege and blocking all supplies, including humanitarian aid into Gaza, to force new ceasefire terms. So we should be clear and call it what it is in this House: collective punishment of the Palestinian people, starvation as a method of war, and a blatant war crime. So will the Minister finally sanction Israel for these gross violations of international law?
Hear, hear, hear.
Minister.
Well, specifically on the question of sanctions, I think he knows what I'm going to say, which is we don't talk about them until we actually make a decision, and we do review any tools that we have available to us to protest. But I think we also need to understand that we're in the midst of a peace process, and we know that peace processes throughout history have stop-start elements to them. But what we are doing is we are making sure that our views, the views of this House, the view of the government, is that we must we must make sure that humanitarian aid is not prevented from entering Gaza. While this important peace process is going on, people still need to eat, they still need to have life-saving medical treatment, children still need to be educated, and that is the point that we've continued to make all the way along.
Caroline Bowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In her letter resigning as International Development Minister last week, the Right Honourable Member for Oxford East wrote that it will be impossible, given this cut's depth, to maintain the government's support for all its development commitments, and explicitly cited aid to Gaza. And at this point, I would just like to commend the Totnes Friends of Palestine for raising now £10,000 to help those in Gaza. With hospitals destroyed, a lack of clean water, desperate food shortages and now more threats to power and water supplies, how will the Minister ensure that last week's cut to development spending will not worsen the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Gaza.
Minister.
Well, could I congratulate her for all the work that she does in her community to support international support and solidarity for communities in Gaza. And we know that the humanitarian situation remains extremely challenging, with over 48,000 having been killed and 90% of the population have been displaced, many repeatedly. But I think the UK has a really good story to tell. We've been in there for for decades now, and we've increased that. She mentions the outgoing Minister for Development, and of course there was a further £17 million announced on the 28th of January, so that healthcare, food and shelter could reach tens of thousands of civilians and to support vital infrastructure. She asks about ongoing funding, and she's right to ask that question and hold our feet to the fire. And once we've had time to look at the coming financial years and the comprehensive spending review, she will have her answer.
That's been Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that Israel's decision to block aid to over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza is collective punishment, and with 80% of Gaza's health infrastructure destroyed, 1,000 medical workers killed, and the WHO estimating that 14,000 Palestinians, including 4,500 children, require urgent medical evacuation? What concrete steps have we taken to ensure that A, aid gets in, and B, those that need medical treatment have that treatment made available to them?
I thank the member for Bolton for her question and for her ongoing campaigning on humanitarian aid for Gaza. And of course, it's very positive that the Rafah crossing remains open, enabling a significant increase in the number of medical evacuations in recent weeks. It's vital that Israel ensures that there is a sustained passage for patients who need treatment not available in Gaza. Officials from across all relevant Whitehall departments are exploring avenues to ensure our support best meets the needs of the critically ill in Gaza. And the member previously on the other benches did talk about the medical staff who are under threat, and we have supported with technical advice and training, and also we announced £1 million for the Egyptian Ministry of Health and Population, delivered through the WHO Egypt, to support medically evacuated Palestinians from Gaza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Israel All-Party Group heard from the families of 5 of the remaining hostages. Of the 59 hostages still in captivity, it's estimated that only 24 are alive and 35 have been murdered. The reality is that the recently released Eli Sharabai described the conditions he was held in chains, brutally beaten and starved. The reality is that Alon Ohen, who is also alongside him, remains in captivity. The families believe that there is a very vulnerable position for all those remaining hostages. So clearly the demand has to be for all of the hostages to be released immediately, and that should be the aim of the British government. What action is the Minister taking to make sure that that happens?
Minister.
I thank the member for his question about the hostages and his ongoing support for peace in the region. And we know that the families who, of course, have the UK connection, and he specifically mentioned Ellie's family, Ellie Sharabi. The UK has played an active role in coordinating with international partners since the beginning of the conflict. The Foreign Secretary has visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories on 3 occasions since taking office, and has worked closely with European partners to push for a resolution to secure the ceasefire. And I have to say, I do think the situation has improved on that front in the last couple of weeks. But he's right to emphasise the return of hostages as part of that negotiated next part of the peace process. And I thank him for his question.
Frank McNally.
Thank the Minister for updating the House on this troubling matter. This decision by the Israeli government is contrary to international humanitarian law and clearly undermines such a fragile ceasefire. Both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have been absolutely clear of the right of Palestinians to return home to Gaza to rebuild their lives. So does the Minister agree with me that that right is jeopardised by the blocking of critical humanitarian aid? And what actions will the government take if that right continues to be restricted?
He's quite right to say that humanitarian aid should never be contingent on a ceasefire or used as a political tool. And we urge the government of Israel to lift restrictions immediately and unconditionally. And he asks what else this government will do. We will continue to support the peace process, to support both sides getting around the table, freeing the hostages, allowing the aid in, and having a vision for the future of this region, which is so affected by conflict and death.
Lamran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I pay tribute to the former International Development Secretary, my constituency neighbour, the Right Honourable Member for Oxford East, for her work in this area and also the wise words in her resignation letter. The Minister rightly said that forced displacement is unacceptable. Indeed, I think she mentioned that the actions of the illegal extremist settlers are unlawful. You may have seen, Mr. Speaker, at the Oscars this week, an incredible film called No Other Land, made by both Israelis and Palestinians together, highlighting the forced displacements in Masafer Yatta, won the Oscar. Now, I bet they would trade every gong going for that film to have its desired effect and for the violence to stop. We can do something. And if there was ever a time for us to ban illegal settlement goods that funds these extremist settlers, is now not the time?
Minister.
Could I thank the Honourable Lady for all of her work in the community and also in this House, educating members about not just the two sides that we always think about, but also the Christian community in Gaza as well, and in Palestine, Palestinians, Christians, who are also affected so much by the current conflict. She mentions the UK's position on settlements, and I wanted to be clear that the UK's position on settlements is they're illegal under international law, present an obstacle to peace, and threaten the physical viability of a two-state solution.
Seshilobi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, many members have spoken about the importance of humanitarian aid, that vital aid to save so many lives. But what's also important are the vital aid workers who are working on the ground in really horrific conditions. Estimates show that over 320 aid workers have been killed, the highest ever on record. And yet we see so many different aid organisations being attacked on social media, saying they have links to terrorist organisations. What more can the Minister do to outline and reiterate this government's support for vital international aid organisations, including Islamic Relief, based in my constituency, who are only one of the UK's 5 NGOs certified by the core humanitarian standards, meaning they go through the most rigorous standards on their aid and transparency? What more can we do to support these vital aid workers?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her important work in this area and for the aid organisations which are based locally just across the river. And it is true to say that aid must get to those who need it across all areas, but that the important work of aid workers must be respected and aid workers must be protected. And it's horrifying to hear reports, for example, that 6 babies have died from hypothermia and cold-related injuries in Gaza in just 2 weeks. And this is why aid organisations such as Islamic Aid, but the Red Cross and all the other organisations who make up the partnerships across the region must be able to get in to Gaza to do their important work, and also must be allowed to bring in the types of goods such as tents, medical equipment and machinery needed to support the resumption of basic services in Gaza.
Jim Shum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for the answers to the UQ. The PM was very clear in the Chamber yesterday in his support for Ukraine until peace is achieved over the weekend, for which I am eternally grateful. But will the Minister confirm that our support remains with Israel as we attempt to secure peace for now and a lasting solution to maintain? And we hope that a future for the children on both sides of that Gaza boundary can be achieved. Thank you so much.
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for mentioning the children in this conflict. And he's very well aware of the trauma that can be passed down from generation to generation as a result, and also thinking of orphans in the region, of which there are many. And I thank him for his commitment to the State of Israel, as he says, and to a secure future for the people of Israel, so that the people of Israel can have that security which they seek, but that also an end can come to that of the suffering of people in Palestine as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In addition to my sadness and alarm about the Netanyahu government again blocking aid from entering into Gaza, I have repeatedly raised my concerns in Parliament over the years about the forced evictions and illegal settlements in the West Bank. And now, shockingly, for the first time in 2 decades, there are tanks in Jenin and further displacement of Palestinians. So, Minister, what representations is the government making to the Israeli government that aid must not be blocked from entering Gaza, and that this illegal occupation and further evictions must immediately be stopped?
Minister.
It gives me a further opportunity to emphasise that settlements, Israeli settlements, are illegal under international law and do harm prospects for a two-state solution. The Foreign Secretary has made it clear on a number of occasions with Israeli ministers that the government must clamp down on settler violence and end settler expansion.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for mentioning orphans, because unfortunately orphans don't have too much a voice in this place, but I'm grateful for doing so, and sadly there are too many across the world who see more and more conflict. Can I agree with my right honourable friend, the member for North West Hampshire, that civilian lives, whether they be Israeli or Palestinian, are just as precious? We should do all we can across the House to save life. But can I ask, I mean, I do have concerns. It may be a surprise, Mr. Speaker, that Ukraine may not be the biggest foreign policy headache for the government over the next coming months. And I think it may well be Israel and the divergence on Israel with the new American administration. That is of great concern. So does she accept what has been agreed in Cairo today at the Cairo Arab Summit, $53 billion 5-year reconstruction plan for Gaza, which allows displaced Palestinians to return, that we don't see a Trump Gaza Riviera, and it is countries in the region putting Palestinians back into Gaza at the heart of the future of Gaza?
Minister.
I thank the member for his question with the many aspects in it. And of course, he's aware that the majority of all homes in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. And the economy has collapsed, and delivery of basic services, including energy and water, have been badly affected. Over 60% of the electricity distribution network has been damaged or destroyed. Over 90% of main roads are damaged, profoundly limiting mobility of people, aid and goods. And that's why it's so welcome that the $53.2 billion has been underlined. And we are supportive of the regional efforts to cohere around a single, workable reconstruction plan for Gaza. And we support the region with their expertise in construction in the region to get going on that. And if I could briefly answer his question as well about the orphans, he's aware perhaps that the Foreign Secretary has as one of his main areas of concern the welfare of children, particularly children who are orphans or in need of adoption or fostering. And I will take back to him today his concern, particularly for that work stream that we do quite a lot on in the Foreign Office, and emphasise its importance.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The suffering of Palestinian children who have been attacked by Israeli drones is devastating. Yeah. And the fact that those children are denied medical support and assistance is even more devastating. Yeah. The Minister's talked about how we're looking at medical evacuations, but would the Minister agree with me? Actions speak louder than words. And when will enough be enough? And when will these children get the attention that they so desperately need when other countries are doing the same right now?
Yeah. She's quite right to talk about the children, and we know whether it's in Sudan, whether it is in Ukraine and everywhere else, that children suffer that deep trauma as a result of conflict. And we're deeply alarmed by the disproportionate impact of the conflict on children in Gaza. Half of Gaza's population, of course, are children. and the consequences of tens of thousands killed, injured or separated from parents threaten not only their individual futures but the very fabric of Palestinian society for generations to come. Most, if not all, students in Gaza have not had access to education since the 7th of October, and at least 88% of school buildings will need full or major reconstruction. So she's quite right to say, what are we doing? And the UK is supporting the restoration of education services in Gaza, including through the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East. And she would be aware as well of the important work to keep going to maintain the ceasefire that we've got so that we have a hope of that reconstruction dream.
Bentley.
I'm very pleased to hear the Minister emphasise that the withholding of humanitarian aid is a direct contravention of humanitarian international law. I would also like to ask her what steps her government is taking to work with partners both in the region and in Europe to apply pressure to the Israeli government to ensure that the flow of such critical aid is no longer impeded.
Well, I thank the member for his question, and that is precisely why we have ministerial visits to the region, and in order to emphasise the importance that it is, not just to the government but to this House, that we take a message to keep pushing for that peaceful future and to keep pushing for the importance of, in the meantime, today, enough food to eat, enough water to wash and to cook, and of course to educate and to keep people healthy and safe.
Tricia Ferguson.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask my honourable friend if the government has carried out an assessment of the impact of the withdrawal of US aid from the region, and in light of any assessment that may have been carried out, is the government confident that the decision to cut international aid from our budget will not be an increasingly detrimental problem in Gaza? I understand that the Prime Minister has said that Gaza is ring-fenced, if you like, and that our humanitarian aid there will continue, but I am concerned that the withdrawal of American aid may leave a vacuum that we cannot fill.
Minister.
Could I thank her for her question? And it is true to say that over the decades, the US people, the people of the USA, have been so generous across the world in aid, including in this region. And so it's going to be almost impossible to replace the important work that USAID has done over the decades in the Middle East. However, I do not give up hope, because I think we have to keep making the case for working together internationally. A lot of the work that is done in the region is by partners working multilaterally, and so it's, yes, a part of USAID, but it's also trying to encourage other countries and countries in the region which perhaps do have more vibrant economies to step up to the plate now and to fill those gaps. Her specific question about the assessment, it's not complete because the decision is still relatively recent, as is our own decision of under a week ago. But I trust that we will come back to the House when we have more of a shape of the comprehensive spending review and how we are going to address this difficult problem.
Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the London School of Economics Middle East Centre will host the launch of a book called Understanding Hamas. One contributor to the book, Azam Tamimi, has previously called for the destruction of the State of Israel. Speakers at the event deny Hamas as a terrorist organisation and dismiss Israel wrongly as a white settler colonialist nation. Can the Minister join me in saying very clearly this is not an accurate description of Israel? There is no genocide, as unfortunately I heard a member claim earlier, and Hamas is a terrorist organisation that seeks to murder Jews and has brought nothing but destruction and disaster to the people of Gaza.
Minister.
Well, I thank him for doing his research before coming to the House, and I can confirm that Hamas is a prescribed terror organisation by our government for those very reasons. And I think it is really important that we are very robust in our defence of the right of the State of Israel to exist as our allies.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of both Israel and Palestine have been failed by their leadership with horrific
consequences. One person who knew that more than most was my constituent's father, Oded Lifshitz, whose coffin we saw paraded horrifically through the streets of Khan Yunis. Oded, we should say his name in this place because he dedicated his life to securing peace between Israel and Palestine. He drove ambulances over the border to help Palestinian people. We can be clear in this chamber that withholding aid is wrong, using starvation as a weapon of war is wrong, but if we want to challenge their leadership, we must step up ourselves. The Minister spoke previously about what we are doing to try and support medical needs in Gaza. Can she be clear, for the avoidance of doubt, in his memory may it be a blessing, in his cause we will follow up, that we will evacuate people who need it to the UK for medical assistance from Gaza?
I thank my honourable friend, and the family have a great champion in her coming to the House and laying out in such clear terms her expectation of the government. And there have been certain schemes to assist families in medical emergencies. And with her permission, I will write to her with the exact detail and the exact guidelines which are used by the government to determine who's eligible for those schemes.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are now 60,000 known deaths in Gaza. Israel is already accused by the ICJ and ICC of war crimes and including genocidal acts, and they're now committing a new war crime in denial of food and water to the people of Gaza. What will it take for the British government to cease all arms supplies to Israel, to end the use of the RAF bases in Akrotiri as a staging point for delivery to Israel, and when will we end the security cooperation with Israel to make it absolutely clear that we're not prepared to support a regime which is breaking international humanitarian law in so many respects?
Minister.
As the member is aware, as soon as the Foreign Secretary took office, he ordered a review into the compliance with international humanitarian law of various export items. And following the review, the government suspended export licences to Israel under a number of categories and assessed that where there was a clear risk that they might be used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international humanitarian law. On the question of genocide, as he is aware, it's not a question for the Minister to determine at the dispatch box, but of course legal experts continue to look at definitions and descriptions of acts of war and will come forward with their determinations over time.
I'm planning to run this urgent question for only about another 10 minutes, so it would be very helpful if questions could be short, please. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over recent days, we have seen the power of addressing the most challenging diplomatic, military and humanitarian crisis when coordinated action is brought together. And yet in 17 months, we have not seen a parallel when addressing the challenges over Gaza. So what action is her department taking to ensure that there is that coordinated effort? And will the Foreign Secretary call such a summit?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that suggestion, and certainly the UK will continue to work, as it has done, ceaselessly with Israel, the Palestinian Authority, the US and regional partners to build consensus for a post-conflict Gaza governance and security framework which supports conditions for a permanent and sustainable peace. And her request has been heard in the chamber.
Monica.